I'm Tamara, and this is TELUS Talks with Tamara Taggart. We're bringing together experts, thinkers, and leaders, busting myths, sharing stories, and staying connected when Canadians need it the most. We're having unexpected conversations for unprecedented times. Hi, Dr. Craig Olson. How are you?
Not too bad. How are you, Tamara?
I am good. Is it okay if I call you Olav, or what do you prefer?
Sounds good to me.
Okay, perfect. So you are a neuroscientist. You work out of UVic. You're a BC boy.
That's all correct.
That's all correct so far. And how would you describe what it is that you do as a neuroscientist?
That's a great question. Well, we all, anyone that's a research scientist has a focused research area, I guess. So my expertise is in learning and decision making. And we essentially take pictures of people's brains using MRI or EEG, what a lot of people call brainwaves. And so we can see what's happening when they learn to make decisions. And over the last couple of years, we've done a lot of work with what I call applied neuroscience. So we've taken mobile EEG systems that you can run off of like an iPhone, and we've done some pretty cool work where we can measure brain performance, anywhere basically in a couple minutes.
Okay, so let's start with social isolation and our brain. Many of us have been home I think I've been home for a month with my 3 kids and my husband, and it feels like it's about 2 years. What are our brains doing with social isolation?
So it's a complex question. Given my day job, I like to ground everything in science. Mm-hmm. So there's a lot of research on the impact of isolation on brain function and on people. The work that I've been a part of involves the space program. So, they've been studying if you put people in what we call an analog. So the high seas habitat in Hawaii, it's a little bubble on the side of a volcano, and they lock people in there for a year because that's how long they're going to be on the surface of Mars, and they study what's going on with these people. They also look at long duration space missions. So when people go up to ISS, they're up there for quite a while. And even on Earth, like in other environments, so polar expeditions, what happens to the people that are down in Antarctica. And basically what you find is if you put people in these sort of extreme isolated conditions, it's not great for your brain health. Mm. So you get increases in cognitive fatigue, for instance. Your circadian rhythms can be messed up. Sleep disorders, people report, stress, depression, and even reductions in the functional of your immune system, funnily enough, which given COVID, I guess, is particularly interesting.
Mm-hmm. So it's interesting that you say that, because I think the number one complaint right now that I'm hearing from a lot of people is they aren't sleeping well.
They aren't.
Yeah, they're not sleeping well right now.
Yeah, and that's in line with the research, so it makes sense. So the question is why, I guess. Why is all this happening to us? Yeah. So our brain is essentially hardwired to be social. Like we when we see people and talk to people, parts of our brain light up. It's like an emotion. It's not the warm fuzzy you get. It's a very fast emotional response, which is just a key part of social interaction. And this is true across all living organisms, in the sense that if you remove them from social situations, they don't do well. So it seems to me that our brains are missing social interaction, and as a result, we have these negative consequences, which are still being researched. Like we're basically living in an experiment right now.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, but us being, socially isolated, staying at home with our families or whoever it might be, is obviously very different than being on Mars.
That's true. So one of the problems we have is that the research that's being done on this is done in these pretty extreme environments, where there's it's just different. If you're part of a Mars mission in training, it's a lot different than sitting at home and watching TV at night. I can speak to that one from personal experience, actually. So when I did a 1 week mission in the Mars habitat in Hawaii, and yeah, all the things I'm doing now to alleviate boredom weren't accessible to me there. So,
Right. What was that like? What was that like when you did that for a week?
it was it was amazing, actually. It was. I told my mom when I was really young I wanted to be an astronaut, and that's never going to happen. But for 1 week, I got to be a simulated astronaut as part of a research project. So that the people there actually treat it very real. It's a full simulation. Every time we went outside, we had to wear spacesuits.
Mm.
We couldn't use FaceTime because all of your communications are lagged to simulate the transmission time for being on Mars. We ate freeze-dried food, 16-hour work days doing the sort of daily tasks that astronauts would do. But, I still, there I found myself looking out at the outside world, wondering what's going on because we had two small windows. And I find myself doing that now almost.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
So we don't really have, I guess it's a long answer to the fact we don't have a lot of research for the situation we're currently in, but we have all these little tidbits from, some of the stuff I've found interesting is there's actual research that shows that our brains respond differently during actual face-to-face conversation than when we do it over the internet, like we are now. And that while this is a replacement in a sense, it's not the same as the real thing.
Yeah, of course. And what about if we do go out? If I go out, I found, I took the dog for a walk yesterday. And of course, when you're out walking, people cross the street when they're seeing, so we're not on the same path, right? So somebody's walking towards me, they walk across, or I do. And I found myself wanting to talk, just make small talk with somebody. So they're strangers. Like, why am I all of a sudden wanting to talk to strangers?
Well, this is your socially starved brain in a sense, which is when we have these interactions, there's neurotransmitters that are released that are rewarding. So they basically, it's like you reward yourself when you do these things. And there's other parts of the brain that are lighting up saying, hey, this is a good thing. And I've heard this from a couple of people now, but I was at the grocery store not long ago, and I found myself having this conversation. We were in line 6 feet apart as you are, and had this very long conversation with a complete stranger that I probably would have never had. And in my mind, I was thinking, this is just literally my brain going, thank God there's someone to talk to.
Right. Right.
And there's some interesting work. One of the people I like to follow when I do this stuff, he's a social neuroscientist down in California. He basically would even argue that we define self that way. Like our sense of self isn't an individual thing. It's a social definition. And that's one of the reasons we're hardwired and we see these things is that it's just part of who we are, is to crave social interaction.
Is it correct to say that, it used to be, or a form of punishment, obviously, is to remove people from socializing, whether it be, I guess, solitary confinement or something like that? Is like, this is how we punish people?
And there's a phenomenon known as social pain, and a lot of people equivalent that to physical pain, which is if you there's a good example of this. There was a guy down in the United States who was offered $1 million to lock himself essentially in a sensory deprivation room. Mm. It was dark, and all he had was a cot and a small fridge, I believe, and something so he could, he had to feed himself. And it was $1 million. And after 20 days, he said, I just can't do this, and took $60,000 to buy his way out.
Wow.
And we know that people don't handle social isolation that well. Now, of course, there's individual differences, which is a whole thing to talk about, I guess. But yeah. Most of us don't like being withdrawn that way. And it is a form of punishment because your brain is, in the case of extreme sensory deprivation, you're even crying out just for a visual stimulus. Mm. Right now we're only getting a bit of social isolation, and most of us are isolating with another person typically, although there are a lot of people, I guess, that aren't. But so it's not as bad as those extreme situations.
Right. It's interesting that you say that because, we have all these places now where you can go and float in water in this little capsule where you can't smell anything, see anything, hear anything. And you're floating in this, I've never done it because it actually scares me. The idea of that makes me feel not very good. But a lot of people say that it's relaxing but I mean, so that's something people choose to do, but this is very different because we didn't choose any of this. We didn't choose to be staying home right now.
No, and if you talk about sensory deprivation, I'd have to do a bit of reading, I guess, but I do know that in the short term, these things aren't bad for you. And I guess there's an argument to be made that in the short term, there's possibly a benefit. The people that choose to do these things typically don't do that for long periods of time.
True.
In terms of what we're doing now, of course, we have a lot of forms of input. We're just missing some things, which is why I think we're holding up really well, right? I hate to speak for the province of British Columbia or anybody else, but it's we're in a pretty good situation in the sense that we can still get outside and get some fresh air. We can still get our exercise in. We have these limited social interactions that are at least something.
Right. So what happens to our mental health if this goes on for is there an expiry date for when we start to not do well?
So that's a good question. So if you take something like the Mars habitat, it's at about the 2-month mark that they start to see problems. And in there, you've got a crew of 6, so you're not isolated completely, but you are cut off from the outside world. And again, as we said earlier, it's a very different environment. And I guess what I'm saying, the answer is we just don't know. How long can we maintain this, and how long can the things that we can do to offset this slow that? But there's no doubt that there will be an increase in say, mental health issues after this. And I've already seen that in the media. People are starting to talk. I have a friend, Vinay, who's a clinical neuropsychologist at the University of Calgary, and he's well aware that this is going to be a problem. And in fact, one of the interesting things is even when it's over, it might be an issue, because if you look at the post space mission, so they go out into space for an extended period of time, or they go into simulations for a long period of time, they find that even post after the end of these things,
right,
there's still increased levels of stress, and in some cases, post-traumatic stress disorder.
So of course.
So when Dr. Henry comes on and gives us the all clear, it still might not be the end.
Right. It's not like flipping a switch and everything goes back to normal. What about our, decision making? Because I know you're an expert here. So decision making while in self-isolation. So
the simple version of decision making is that we have, at any point in time, you've got a bunch of choices in front of you. And what your brain is trying to do is assign a value to those choices, and not a monetary value, but an actual sort of, what is it worth for me to do this, and what's the gain? And basically, when you start playing with your emotional system, which is what happens in isolation, and you start experiencing cognitive fatigue, your brain's ability to assign values to these things is skewed or messed up. And what a choice you might not have made if you were rested and in a balanced state is a choice that might all of a sudden become something that's a high value choice and you consider doing. Impulse shopping, this comes up fully enough. Like when you impulse shop, basically your brain has an emotional response to that thing you're looking at. And it's assigning all this value to, saying, I have to have it. I love this. I want that.
I've never experienced that before.
No, never. Okay, interesting. But then really what happens is your values are skewed, so you make a choice you might not make, right? This is why, there's all these funny studies that show that people eat more ice cream when they're sad, right? It's because it's very easy to break a dietary choice if you're in an emotional state, because your brain is assigning values this wrong way. So in this state we're in now, as it progresses, our decision-making probably gets a bit compromised. Now, to what extent, again, we don't know. It will come to how well we can mitigate what's happening.
Right. So would an example of that be, we've been self-isolating for a period of time and a few months. I really want to see my best friend, and I just say, I'm coming over. I can come over and have a glass of wine with you and sit on your couch. It'll be fine.
Well, exactly. So that's the kind of thing where your basically your brain is kind of like, by definition, I think I'm a bit of a nerd. So I always like to frame this in the Star Trek problem, which is we're supposed to be Captain Spock, right? We're supposed to be completely rational and just constantly just evaluate the numbers and do these things.
Yeah.
But the reality is we all have a bit of Captain Kirk where our emotional system wants to see the friend. So this is kind of what's happening, right? Is that as this progresses, you hit it perfectly. Our values will bias a little bit, and our assessments of things will change, and it's just our brain trying, because you've got this whole emotional system which is underlying the social brain, which is like craving that interaction.
Yeah.
The simple version of this is imagine you had that glass of wine before you made the decision. Alcohol impairs judgment, as we know. Right. Effectively, what it does is it's playing with those values we've talked about, right? So all of a sudden, the value to go see your friend is even stronger because alcohol is shutting down Spock and letting Captain Kirk run wild.
Yeah. And I even when you were talking about the impulse shopping or whether it's seeing your friend, it's so emotional. And sometimes you strangely feel sorry for yourself when you have no real reason to feel sorry for yourself. We're healthy, we're at home, we have all these things, but I miss these things and now I feel bad about it. So I'm going to either eat too much or go see my friend and take a risk or whatever it might be, right?
Well, yeah, you're just trying to restore positive balance in a sense. Like you're doing things to make yourself happy because you're in a situation by definition that's going to help make you not happy. Exactly. And that's your brain basically looking for rewards. Another part of what drives us is this reward-seeking behavior. And by reward, I don't mean like money per se, but just things that we enjoy, right?
That make us feel good.
Yeah, exactly. And as the situation progresses and we start to slip further and further down, that will become more and more prominent. Like I would imagine rule breaking of the rules that are established will increase over time, right? Like
have there been studies done on how, I'm sure there have, but I'm just curious, we're talking as adults, right? And I'm thinking, we didn't have all those needs when we were kids. And so because their brains are still developing, and they're now in this weird situation where we've taken them out of school and they're having to, because you talked about technology not being the same as being in person.
Yeah, there are studies that show that the impact of social isolation on children is even harder than on adults, probably because they're going through their developmental years. What they have, though, that helps them is how adaptable children are. My son sits in his room and plays Fortnite talking to three of his best friends from school at the same time. And I think to myself, I wish he wasn't playing that game that much. But at the same time, he's having interactions with kids his own age, which is a positive thing. Right.
But it doesn't replace him going outside and
No.
seeing them in person, right?
It doesn't. And that's there is this, like I said earlier, there's this subset of literature that looks at like this, the online conversations versus face-to-face interaction. And the general consensus is it's not as good as the real thing. But the question is to what extent? It's really one of these things where you get these very simple studies that say, okay, people are happier after face-to-face conversation than online conversation. But comparing it to no conversation at all, obviously, it's better than nothing.
Well, yeah, and I mean, if we were all we didn't have telephones. If this was, thousands of years ago, we didn't have, phones or any of the things that we have. We're so fortunate in so many ways.
I think that if we didn't have the advantages we have today, I don't presume to know what the decision making is behind, the way we're handling this crisis. That's for the politicians and the medical personnel of Canada. But I imagine that decisions would be made differently because without like the Zoom chats and the rest of it, and without being able to get out to get some groceries, we'd be handling this a lot worse. And I don't even know if we'd be able to handle it. It would be interesting.
What do you find, as a scientist who studies this sort of stuff, what do you find most interesting about this this climate that we're in right now with a worldwide pandemic and, countries handling it differently? What are you watching closely?
A couple of things, I guess. I'm very curious about the decision-making process that's happening at different levels. Right now, our decisions are being made based on medical information, which is 100% the right thing to do. Like, there's no doubt. And in fact, in British Columbia, it's obvious that we've handled this better than most places. So I'm curious. I like to think about the factors and how they're being weighted. But I know there's other factors because we haven't talked about it a lot. But I know the Prime Minister is being peppered with questions about when will this end, because people are starting to think about the economics of this. We've got a lot of people that are unemployed and they want to go back to work. It's just, can they? So I look at that kind of stuff and I'm curious. And I guess in terms of what we've been doing recently, like when we were in the Mars habitat, we basically have developed a technology where we can do a brain health and performance assessment in about 5 minutes. And I just wish I could have that on everybody right now, just to track this over time. So we basically measured ourselves every day for a week, and we were able to see changes in brain function in just a week. Admittedly, we worked 7 16-hour days in a row, so to have an increase of cognitive fatigue wasn't surprising, and it was a pretty high stress environment because it was our one chance to show NASA we could do what we could do. But I'd love to be tracking everybody right now, just to see, because what's changing in the world is neuroscience has become something you can do at home.
Right.
So when I started my PhD, if I said brainwaves, it meant putting 64 electrodes on your head. It took an hour and a half, and now you can get a headband that measures data, and you can do the whole thing in a couple minutes.
Wow.
So I guess that's something I've been very curious about. I measure myself every day, but the problem is when you have a sample size of 1, it's hard to draw any conclusions.
Right. Of course. And how do you do things to keep your brain healthy during this time?
Yeah.
What do you do?
Yeah. So the sort of, funnily enough, I'm working on a NASA grant right now, which it's pitched at basically how do you alleviate the symptoms of the negative impact of these kind of things. And so the problem we have is that the one that NASA puts most of their weight into is crew selection. So they try to find people that can handle these environments, right? And that's what I meant earlier about individual differences. There are people right now that are probably not doing that badly with this, and it's just, okay, whatever, let's get on with life. And then there's people on the opposite end of the spectrum that this is like the worst thing you could do to them. That doesn't help us too much. What does work, though, is the stuff that I always call this common sense, which is, we say this a lot, but there's scientific research to show this, but we all kind of know it. So diet, nutrition is exceptionally important for mental health. There's, countless studies that show the positive impact of a good diet and good nutrition on brain function. Mm-hmm. So right now would be the worst time to go on a junk food bender, even though we might want to do that because we're feeling sad and depressed. Exercise, the impact of exercise on brain function is massive, whether it's anaerobic or aerobic exercise. So it's not a time to slag off there. And it's a time to make sure you get your steps in, respect the rules that are in place, keep social distance, but make sure you get your exercise in. And then sleep health is a big one. If you sleep well, your brain is generally healthier. So anything you can do to promote good sleep health. So again, stuff that we kind of know, like you shouldn't be staring at your iPad in bed minutes before you go to bed. You should be doing this stuff that helps you get a good sleep. And then the last thing that has been experimented with the missions, especially in the polar regions, is social interventions. So we're, being able to reach out through some form of online medium and talk to the people in your life and create as much social interaction as you can, given the restrictions that are in place.
Yeah, well, sometimes we need to be reminded of the common sense things, don't we? We just forget.
Yeah, it's true. I guess for me, it's kind of one of these things where I can see the pictures and say, wow, that's what happens to your brain if you don't exercise.
Right.
I'm not, anyone that would know me personally knows that I'm like anyone else. I know a lot of this stuff and do my best to follow it, but no one's perfect.
Yeah, none of us are. Exactly. I can't thank you enough for all of this. This has been great. You have a podcast. You're starting a podcast, are you?
I've been perpetually starting a podcast for about 2 years, but we've finally recorded the first couple of episodes. It's That Neuroscience Guy, and I've got a Twitter handle for it, which I'd like to think that maybe COVID will help me realize this dream because I've got a bit more free time at home.
Well, that's excellent. And I was looking at your website, which is olavkrigolson.com. That's OLAVKRIGOLSON.com. And you're an adventurer. You've climbed Everest. You've been all over the place. You are, it's fascinating to read about everything that you've done, Doctor.
Well, thank you. I'll have to correct that for the public. I've been to Everest Base Camp and climbed a bit higher. I've yet to be on top. It would be a good dream, but at least I've been there. It's something.
Listen, I was looking at it last night, and to me, it looked like you climbed the whole thing. So there you go.
I have in virtual reality, which is an advantage of COVID. We've got a VR headset that I brought home from my lab because we're doing some experiments, and I put my son and myself on top of Mount Everest. So that was kind of fun. So I guess I have been there in a sense.
There you go. Thank you again so much for your time. Really appreciate it. And thanks for sharing some of your research and knowledge with us.
Not a problem. Thank you so much for having me. I appreciate it.
All right. And be sure to join us here on TELUS Talks with Tamara Taggart every Tuesday and Thursday.